your hand.
Okay, Nickan is a student at UC Berkeley, a member of the UC Academic Senate as well. He's an intern in Kay Harrison's, Berkeley Councilwoman Kay Harrison's office, and a member of Democratic Socialists of America. And finally, he plays a mean piano, violin, and trumpet. Not tonight, but... Okay, you want to take it?
Sure. All right.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. Raymond, I guess, introduced me well. I'm from Berkeley, I'm also Iranian American. I'll be giving a presentation on the history of Iran, especially with relation to its relationship with the US, and basically how we got to where we are today. And obviously it's an issue that's very personal to me as well. So,
let me set up this.
One second while we set up the presentation.
Yeah, so great.
Do you want the lights down?
Yeah, we'll turn it down.
Somebody hit the lights.
Is the projector on?
Yes, that's right.
There we go.
The other side of the room. Lights back here.
All right, so without further ado, let's begin. Let's start with some background. Most know Iran is a nation in the heart of West Asia, bordered by about 6 other countries. It has a population of 83 million, which is a quarter of that of the US. And the size is just over double the size of Texas, or 4 times the size of California. Something that is kind of hard to imagine sometimes to get in proportion to the size of the country. It's a nation with a very rich history, tracing back to about the 6th century BC, when Cyrus the Great, or Kurusha Kabir, on the left, founded the Achaemenid Empire. He was considered by some to be one of the world's first advocates of religious tolerance. And he created the Cyrus cylinder, which is on the right. It's considered by some to be the first universal declaration of human rights in the world. It's actually hard to tell based on the size of what you see, but it's actually very small. It's about this big, something I didn't realize until I saw it in person. As with most countries with that long of a history, it's had its ups and downs. This was the Persian Empire at its greatest extent, also in the 6th century BC. But while it's been a vast empire, it's also been the subject of imperial conquest at the hands of Alexander the Great, the Greeks, in the 4th century BC, and in the 7th century CE, it was invaded by the Rashidun Caliphate, which is when Islam was introduced to Iran. But let's fast forward about 2,000 years to the year 1900. So you see on the left, in the middle of the picture on the right, is Mozaffar ad-Din Shah Qajar. He was Shah of Iran at the time. He also happens to be my great-great-great-grandfather. It's an interesting fact, but I don't take too much pride in it, given the fact that the Qajar dynasty was one of the more corrupt and incompetent dynasties in the US. During this time, Iran suffered a lot of territorial loss. Most of us know the Caucasus was part of Iran and was lost to the Russian Empire. And during this time, a lot of Iranians started to grow more unhappy with the state of the country. The leaders were, addicted to opium at the time. the country was becoming more and more subjugated by foreign powers. So, in fact, in 1901, the year after where we are at right now, the Darcy oil concession was signed, which granted exclusive oil prospecting rights to a British businessman, William Darcy, and his oil prospecting in Iran later led to the creation of the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, which will come into play later, which is also the predecessor of what's now British Petroleum. This obviously became a major resource in Iran and thus put that resource under British hands. Only 6 years later came the Anglo-Russian Convention, where the British Empire and the Russian Empire basically divvied up Iran between the two of them, saying this is my sphere of influence, this is my sphere of influence. On the right, there's a political cartoon that was published that year, actually. So you have it might be hard to read, but it says, British lion to Russian bear. Look here, you can play with his head and I can play with his tail. And we can both stroke the small of his back. Persian cat. I don't remember having been consulted about this. So indeed, the Shah of Iran at the time actually wasn't consulted about this agreement. It was basically just two foreign powers agreeing who will have control of which area. So with this mounting pressure from the Iranian public, particularly a coalition of merchants and intelligentsia, as well as political liberals, social democrats, and radicals, pressured the Shah, Mozaffar Shah to sign the Persian Constitution of 1906. So this was a major turning point in Iranian political history because it turned Iran from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional one. It created the Majlis, which in Farsi and in Arabic means refers to the parliament. On the right is one of the first sessions of the Majlis in Iran in the early 1910s. Despite this, though, foreign domination continued to loom. Mozaffar Shah died a few months later, and in 1925, the Qajar dynasty was overthrown by a man named Reza Pahlavi, or Reza Shah, on the left. He initially actually wanted to declare a republic, but another common theme, British influence, as well as clerics within Iran pressured him to declare a monarchy, and that's what he did. But this would later be his undoing, as in 1941, during World War II, Iran had a policy of neutrality, which upset both the British and the Soviet Union, who together invaded Iran and forced Reza Shah to abdicate in favor of his son. On the right, Mohammad Reza Shah. And Mohammad Reza Shah, who's often called just the Shah because he was the last Shah of Iran, was basically a British puppet. He continued to maintain control of oil in Iran to the British, and this time, because of the existence of the parliament, Iranian people were going to take this line down. So in 1950, with the election of one of the new sessions of the Majlis, they elected Mohammad Mossadegh as Prime Minister of Iran. This is a name that might be familiar to some, as I can hear. And he was a seasoned politician, 68 years old, and he was a populist, a modernizer, and a strong opponent of foreign influence in Iran. So, we hear a lot in the U.S., a lot of presidential candidates say, and on day one I will do this, on day one I will do this. On day 3, he nationalized oil in Iran, so that's a pretty ambitious agenda. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, brought control of oil back to the domestic, to the country's government. He also introduced a bunch of other social reforms. He introduced unemployment compensation, benefits for sick and unemployed workers, and partial land reform, which partially transferred land revenues from landlords to tenants. So something that was pretty radical at the time for Iran. But of course, the British government wasn't going to take this line down either. So Winston Churchill, Prime Minister at the time, famous imperialist, obviously his goal was to get rid of Mossadegh. And there were some in the Shah's inner circle who also wanted to do this because Mossadegh was taking power from the Shah into the democratically elected government's hands. In 1953, the UK found an ally in the US when Dwight Eisenhower was elected president. So together, the British and the US and other Western powers first started with a boycott of oil in Iran, which crippled the economy. And that started to make people lose faith in the government, of course, because the economy started going bad. And the U.S., the new allies in this operation, used CIA agents to pose as Mossadegh government officials and basically do ridiculous things that would anger people and make people think that the government was being authoritarian. Finally, in 1953, the Churchill and Eisenhower and Kermit Roosevelt convinced the Shah to go on side. So Mossadegh, who's here being celebrated by his supporters, was overthrown in 1953 by a CIA coup. And here's the burning of a newspaper kiosk that belonged to the Tudeh Authority of Iran by pro-Shah demonstrators who were organized by the CIA. So when this happened, essentially they returned absolute power back to the Shah, to the King of Iran. And although he now had full control of the government, this actually stability didn't last long. So he was very ambitious as well. He was a nationalist, and he embarked upon a lot of modernization programs with the Shah. And this actually began to alienate the more religious community in Iran because of the westernization and secularization of the country, particularly the supporters of the then exiled cleric Ruhollah Khomeini. At the same time, he started to anger others as well as he turned more authoritarian. He turned the country from a two-party state to a one-party state, and he cracked down on dissent more and more. In 1977, this reached a boiling point, and demonstrations soon turned into a full-blown revolution. This revolution was basically the broadest tent you can imagine of all parts of society. Youth and students, leftists and socialists, nationalists in the line of Mossadegh, and religious fundamentalists. But the Khomeini, who was at the time still in exile, was able to actually co-opt this movement, and despite the heterogeneousness of the movement, he basically turned it into a prominent, disproportionately led by the fundamentalists. He of course had popular support, he wasn't just a nobody, but he was able to marginalize the other movements in this cause. Meanwhile, the revolution turned stronger. In 1978, there were two key turning points. The first was the Cinema Rex fire in Iran, when arsonists set fire to a theater that had about 400 people in it, and all of them died. It was actually the biggest terrorist attack in the world until 9/11. And nobody knows to this day who did it. Some say it was the fundamentalists, some say it was the Shah, but the revolutionaries were able to pin the blame on the Shah, and thus further galvanize the protesters. The following month, in September of 1979, was what's now known as the Black Friday Massacre. It was on a Friday in Iran, and there was a religious protest happening. It was a general protest, but there were a lot of religious elements in it. And soldiers opened fire on the thousands of protesters, and 88 people died. As an aside, actually, my dad's cousin, who was involved in the revolution at the time, the night before, he was staying with my dad and my grandma, and he was going to go to this protest, but my grandma, who feared for her safety, although she didn't know what would happen, locked all the rooms in their house, all the doors, and didn't let him leave. So my dad's cousin's life could have been saved then, actually. He's still alive to this day. Eventually, though, the movement grew stronger. In January 1979, the Shah fled Iran with his family. 2 weeks later, Khomeini was allowed to return to Iran, and 10 days after that, on February 11th, the monarchy was overthrown, and Khomeini established the Islamic Republic and declared himself supreme leader. Now, there's quite a bit of history that I'm going to skip over, including where Khomeini alienates his former allies in the revolutionary movement by creating this theocracy. But the next major crisis actually occurred later that year, and that was of course, we all know the hostage crisis. And what happened here was a group of students took over, seized control of the U.S. embassy in Iran, in Tehran, and held the 52 Americans in their hostage, demanding that the Shah, who was in exile in the U.S. and in Egypt, be returned to Iran in order to stand trial. Interesting fact, actually, is that 2 weeks into this hostage crisis, the students actually let go 5 women and 8 black people who were in the embassy because they were declaring solidarity with the oppressed minorities of the U.S. It's something interesting to know. But of course, they held the vast majority of hostages there for over a year. And in fact, there was a controversy in which it's alleged that Ronald Reagan negotiated with those who were taking hostages in order to delay the release until inauguration, which happened minutes after his inauguration, of course, to make Carter look worse and make himself look better. But nevertheless, the length and nature of this situation just irreparably damaged relations between the U.S. and Iran. It stoked anti-Iranian sentiments in the U.S. and anti-American sentiments in Iran, and made Khomeini much more popular and powerful within Iran. Then, only a year later, came the Iran-Iraq War. So in September 1980, Saddam Hussein, who at the time was president of Iraq, of course, basically he had the ambition to make Iraq the superpower of the Middle East, which at the time Iran was. And he saw this post-revolutionary Iran as the perfect opportunity. The vulnerability of a country who had just replaced all its military generals, so all the new military officials were inexperienced or came from lower ranks. But this war ended up not turning out so well for him. It actually ended up in a stalemate after 8 years of fighting. There were about 1 million casualties in total, equal on both sides. And in this, the U.S. at the time was allies with Saddam, but there was, of course, we all know the Iran-Contra scandal, where Reagan sold arms to Iran to fund the Contras in Nicaragua. So it's an interesting kind of point where, at this point, the U.S. has taken a stand against the Iranian government, but in secret they're still doing backdoor deals with them. This war, so it ended in 1988. My dad had the misfortune of doing his military service during this time. He ended up not being in combat, but a few close scares actually. A bomb dropped 15 feet away from where he was in the base, so just, still things that affected all people in Iran and of course Iraq as well at the time. Now in 1989, Khomeini died, and he selected as his replacement Ali Khamenei, who at the time was the former president of Iran. On the left is Khamenei in 89, and on the right is him today. So he's of course still supreme leader in Iran to this time. And the previous intended heir, Mahmoud Talebanni, was actually more of a reformist, and he criticized the dictatorial nature of the Iranian government, but for this he lost his position as heir to the supreme leader, so Khamenei took the role. Now we're going to skip about 20 years to another pivotal point in Iranian history. This is the 2009 presidential election in Iran. And in Iran there's basically 2 camps: the principalists, who are more hardline, more fundamentalist, and more hardline in their anti-American rhetoric as well. And there's the reformists who are more moderate and have a more compromising approach to foreign policy as well as economics and social issues. On the left is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who at the time was the incumbent president. He was a principalist. And on the right was the reformist Mir Hossein Mousavi. And it was a very competitive election. Ahmadinejad had, of course, he wasn't the most popular, he wasn't the most unpopular president. But in the end, he won in what was supposedly a landslide, 61 to 35. Immediately, there were reports of election fraud. There were some municipalities where the turnout was more than 100%. So clearly, something was amiss. And this sparked the biggest set of demonstrations in Iran since the revolution. The Green Movement, the color green coming from the color of Mousavi's campaign. Millions of people around Iran demonstrated against the government, as well as in hundreds of cities, both in Iran and around the world, including in LA, where thousands of Iranian Americans protested in Westwood, including a 9-year-old me. So that was my first political experience. One of the dominant figures of the movement was a woman named Neda, who was a 26-year-old woman who was on her way to a protest, standing outside her car when she was shot and killed by an Iranian government soldier, and she became kind of a rallying point of the protesters because of her unjust murder. Of course, many others died as well. Ahmadinejad finished his term, his second term. He was term limited. Hassan Rouhani, who was on the left, was elected president of Iran, and he was the reformist. So starting his presidency, alongside his foreign minister, Javad Zarif, Iran started to take a more conciliatory approach towards the U.S. And that laid the groundwork to, of course, the JCPOA, or the Iran nuclear deal, where the U.S. And other Western countries relaxed their sanctions against Iran, which had been happening basically since the Islamic Republic was established, in exchange for Iran pledging not to put certain limits on their nuclear program. So this was a key moment for many Iranians, just because of the sanctions were debilitating both to Iran's economy, and they were cutting many medical supplies and other things that were vital to Iranians. Of course, 5 years later, Trump ripped up the deal. In 2017, in fact, there was a vote at the beginning of Trump's administration on sanctions to Iran, and those sanctions passed in the Senate 98-2. Only 2 senators voted against it, only 1 Democrat. That Democrat, of course, was Bernie Sanders. And and so these sanctions basically came back in the late 2010s and started to hurt Iran again. And these economic policies, both the policies of the Iranian government, the mismanagement, as well as the sanctions, which hurt things more, started to damage Iran's economy more and more. The rial, which is the currency of Iran, 68 rial to $1 in the 1980s, and the inflation was so great that by today it's 40,000 to $1. That's just to give you a scale of how much inflation has happened. So in 2017, carrying on to today, there have been a series of protests after protests, thousands of demonstrators, as well as general strikes of many of the key industries in Iran. For example, I know there was a major truck driver general strike that was a big news in Iran at the time. That brings us to, of course, the events of this year. So these protests kind of were galvanizing those in opposition to the Iranian regime. People were shouting death to the dictator, death to Khamenei. But that all turned around when the U.S. government, of course, Trump, assassinated Qasem Soleimani, who was the leader of the Quds Force, which is basically the foreign relations special forces unit of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And to put this in perspective, not only did this attack, so this attack obviously was intended by the U.S. government to damage Iran, but it actually strengthened the Iranian government. Many Iranians were angry at President Rouhani, at the supreme leader, but Soleimani was viewed, of course, he was an imperialist, and he was viewed negatively by those in Syria, but he was viewed positively by those in Iran for his, basically he was a symbol of Iranian strength abroad. Really showing Iran's dominance as the superpower in the Middle East, especially as it's competing with Saudi Arabia for that title. So, also I should qualify when I say Syria, I mean those in opposition to the Assad regime. Of course, many in Iraq as well, with Iran's involvement in the Iraqi government. So what happened here is, with the background of the Mossadegh and other U.S. involvement in Iran, there is one thing that most Iranians, have more hatred for than their government's atrocities, and that's the U.S. imperialism in Iran. So what this did was it basically united pro-government and anti-government people in Iran against the U.S. government.
Right.
It actually did a lot of the Iranian government's job for them. And I think this is a great learning point for those who advocate U.S. regime change in Iran, because the government in Iran is, of course, like a terrible and dictatorial government, but achieving change won't come from the outside. Not only is it morally wrong for a foreign government to be effecting change in Iran, it is also ineffective. So even those, neoconservatives who don't have any moral qualms with the U.S. doing this, they're not achieving their goals, except they're helping themselves get elected, but they're not actually making any change in Iran. They're just pleasing the monarchist groups in the U.S. that are allied with John Bolton and the like. So if there is to be change in Iran, it has to come from within, and this is really what these protests have been about. just for some perspective, this is the funeral of Soleimani. He had a 77% approval rating as of the most recent poll before he died, so he was really a universally beloved figure, despite everything that's wrong with him. There were millions of people. This is a clip I took, sped up 20 times because the video took actually 8 minutes to show the whole funeral procession. Millions of people in Iran just showing up for his funeral. It was probably top 20 biggest funerals in world history. One of the ones that was bigger was actually Khomeini's funeral, interestingly enough. So, that just displays the magnitude. Yeah, it's still not over. And then a few days later, there was, of course, the Ukrainian airline that was shot down over Iran. And what happened here, it was really fascinating. Half of the people killed aboard were Iranian nationals. There were also many Canadian nationals and Ukrainian nationals, as well as many others. So this really was a tragedy that affected people both in Iran and outside. But it also, at the same time, kind of sparked a resurgence in the anti-government protests, because Iranians saw that their Iranian government, which down the plane, was responsible for killing their own countrymen. And so new protests started against the Iranian government within Iran after this attack on the airline happened. And it will be, only time will tell what will happen with the movements in the future, especially depending on what happens in November 2020, of course. And then probably the even more topical thing is the coronavirus epidemic. So of course we know this is something that is spreading globally, but it recently spread to Iran last week, and Iran now has the 4th most confirmed cases outside or in the world. Second is South Korea, 3rd is Italy, and actually Iran has the most coronavirus deaths outside of China. The death rate in Iran has been something around 10% compared to only about 2 or 3% worldwide. And part of this is both due to the economic situation in Iran, as well as specifically the renewed Trump sanctions targeting medical supplies in Iran. So this is one case where it's really the direct impact on lives from U.S. involvement in Iran, thanks to the nuclear agreement being torn up. And we don't know how bad this will get. Of course, the issue has been growing exponentially. But unless things change soon, unless these sanctions stop soon, and unless the involvement stops soon, things won't get worse. Both as far as the lives of Iranians, and as far as just tensions in general, relations between Iran and the U.S. We can only hope that one day we can get to a place where Iran and the U.S., and of course countries in general, have functioning and positive relations with each other once again. But it'll take serious change for that to happen. Yeah, that's it